Your brain can't tell a ping from predator footsteps. When you see a notification, your body floods with stress chemicals, creating the same physiological response as facing actual danger. This creates a state of chronic emotional activation that makes everything feel more intense than it actually is. But neuroscientists have discovered something remarkable. Dr. Bolte Taylor's research shows there's a specific window of time, exactly 90 seconds long, where you can completely interrupt this stress cascade. Her findings reveal that any emotional flood naturally peaks and dissipates within 2 minutes, unless your thoughts keep the circuit going. Miss this window, and you're stuck in the emotional loop for hours. The challenge is that modern life makes accessing this 90-second reset nearly impossible. The digital dopamine trap. Every notification triggers a cortisol surge like any threat response, as seen in neuroscience studies on digital dopamine. UC Davis and McLean research confirms that social media use spikes both dopamine and cortisol, fueling stress and anxiety throughout your day. Your body responds to that notification sound the same way it responds to hearing footsteps behind you in a dark alley. The difference is that real danger ends. Digital danger never stops. Think about yesterday. You probably woke up and reached for your phone before your feet hit the floor. Your brain flooded with stress hormones before you even knew what day it was. Then came the emails, the news alerts, the social media notifications. Each ping triggered another cortisol release. By 9 a.m., your nervous system had already experienced more stress responses than your ancestors dealt with in an entire week. Your limbic system doesn't understand the difference between a work deadline and a charging lion. It's the same alarm system humans have used for thousands of years, except now it's going off every few minutes. Imagine a smoke detector that never stops beeping. That's your stress response system on digital overload. The constant activation is rewiring your brain to expect immediate responses to everything. Your neural pathways are literally changing to accommodate this artificial urgency. This rewiring has destroyed something crucial: your ability to access that 90-second emotional reset window. When your brain is constantly flooded with stress chemicals from digital stimulation, new emotions can't complete their natural cycle. They stack on top of each other like cars in a traffic jam. A minor work frustration feels massive because it's building on top of the notification stress, the news anxiety, and the social media comparison triggers you've absorbed all day. Dartmouth's fMRI studies reveal exactly what's happening in your brain during this digital overwhelm. When you're constantly processing notifications and switching between digital tasks, your prefrontal cortex shows reduced activation. This is the brain region responsible for emotional regulation and executive function. Meanwhile, your amygdala becomes hyperactive when processing negative stimuli. You're literally experiencing weakened regulation combined with heightened reactivity. You become less capable of managing emotions precisely when you need that skill most. Consider what happens during a typical morning. You check your phone and see 17 notifications. Your stress response activates 17 times before you've even had coffee. Each activation primes your nervous system for more reactivity. By the time you face an actual challenge, like a difficult conversation with your boss or a conflict with your partner, your emotional regulation system is already overwhelmed. You react more intensely than the situation warrants because you're not just responding to the current stressor. You're responding to the accumulated digital stress load. The paradox runs deeper than most people realize. These devices promise to connect us, but they're creating unprecedented emotional isolation. When you're constantly reacting to digital stimuli, you lose the ability to be present with actual people. Your nervous system becomes so accustomed to the rapid-fire pace of digital interaction that face-to-face conversations feel slow and uncomfortable. Real relationships require the kind of sustained attention that digital platforms actively undermine. Most people experience this daily without recognizing the pattern. You feel irritable and don't know why. You snap at people over minor issues. You feel anxious about things that used to roll off your back. You blame stress, work, or relationships, but the real culprit is the constant low-level activation of your stress response system. It's like trying to have a conversation while someone plays loud music in the background. Everything becomes harder when your nervous system is constantly processing digital noise. The isolation gets worse because digital communication lacks the subtle cues that help regulate emotions in person. When you're texting or emailing, you miss facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. Your brain fills in these gaps with assumptions, usually negative ones. A delayed response becomes rejection. A short message becomes anger. Your emotional reactions intensify because you're operating with incomplete information, but your stress response treats these assumptions as facts. This digital overwhelm doesn't just affect your mood, it changes how you process information and make decisions. When your brain is constantly switching between tasks, you lose the ability to think deeply about problems. Everything feels urgent because your nervous system is stuck in crisis mode. You make more impulsive choices because your prefrontal cortex is too overwhelmed to engage in careful reasoning. The good news is that neuroscientists have identified the specific mechanisms behind this digital stress cascade. Understanding how your brain responds to technology is the first step toward regaining control. When you recognize that your emotional reactivity isn't a personal failing, but a predictable response to environmental factors, you can start making different choices. The key insight is that your brain treats digital stimulation as real danger. Once you understand this, you can see why traditional stress management techniques often fail in our current environment. They were designed for a world where stress came in discrete episodes with clear beginnings and endings. Modern digital stress is constant and cumulative. It requires updated approaches that account for this new reality. People who successfully manage their emotional responses in our connected world share one common trait. They recognize the biological mismatch between their ancient nervous system and modern technology. They don't try to eliminate stress entirely, which is impossible in a connected world. Instead, they develop specific strategies to interrupt the digital stress cascade before it overwhelms their emotional regulation system. But here's what recent research reveals about whether the classic techniques still work in our hyperconnected age. The modern 90-second rule. Harvard's updated research confirms that the 90-second rule still works perfectly, but there's a problem. Digital interference has made it significantly harder to access that natural emotional reset window. UNSW and neuroscience news studies show that online prompts and digital distractions prolong emotional cycles, preventing your system from completing its natural processing. Your phone buzzing during those crucial 90 seconds doesn't just interrupt your focus. It restarts the entire chemical process from the beginning. Here's what researchers discovered about how constant digital stimulation sabotages your emotional regulation. They call it emotional stacking. New South Wales and UNSW studies reveal that repeated emotional triggers prevent cortisol clearance, compounding stress throughout your system. Imagine trying to wash dishes while someone keeps adding dirty plates to the sink. That's what happens to your emotions when new digital triggers arrive before previous feelings can naturally dissipate. Your nervous system never gets a chance to complete the cycle. This stacking effect creates a dangerous snowball. A frustrating email lands in your inbox while you're still processing irritation from a social media post. Then a news notification pops up before either emotion has run its course. Your brain treats each new stimulus as urgent, releasing fresh waves of stress chemicals on top of the ones already circulating. Within minutes, you're carrying the accumulated emotional weight of multiple triggers simultaneously. Every small irritation feels like a major crisis because your emotional baseline is already elevated. You're not just reacting to the current situation. You're reacting to the pile of unprocessed emotions sitting in your system. This explains why you might explode over something trivial like a slow internet connection or a minor inconvenience. Your response isn't proportionate to the trigger because you're not responding to just one thing. Your brain can't tell the difference between finishing one emotional cycle and starting another when they happen milliseconds apart. The neurochemical cleanup crew gets overwhelmed. Cortisol and adrenaline keep circulating because your system never gets the signal that it's safe to flush them out. You remain in a state of perpetual emotional activation, primed to overreact to the next stimulus. The solution requires updating the traditional approach for our digital reality. Researchers developed what they call the airplane mode reset method. This technique acknowledges that you can't access the natural 90-second window while digital inputs keep re-triggering your stress response. You need to create a buffer zone where your nervous system can complete its natural cycle without interference. Here's exactly how it works. The moment you notice an emotional trigger, immediately put your devices in airplane mode. Not silent mode, not do not disturb. Airplane mode. This creates a digital firewall that prevents new stimuli from restarting the chemical cascade. Then apply the traditional 90-second breathing observation while your system processes the current emotion without interruption. The neuroscience behind this is straightforward. Your parasympathetic nervous system, which handles the rest and digest response, can't activate properly when it's constantly interrupted by sympathetic nervous system triggers. Every notification, every buzz, every screen flash sends a signal to your brain that there's still danger present. Removing digital input allows your nervous system to recognize that the immediate threat has passed. Most people resist this technique when they first hear about it. The idea of going offline for 90 seconds triggers its own anxiety response. You might think about the urgent email you could miss or the important call that might come in. This resistance reveals something crucial about digital dependency. If you can't disconnect for 90 seconds without anxiety, your devices have more control over your emotional state than you do. Let's walk through how this works in common scenarios. You're in a video meeting and your colleague makes a comment that irritates you. Instead of responding immediately or letting the frustration build while you pretend to listen, you recognize the emotional trigger. You turn on airplane mode, mute your microphone if necessary, and spend 90 seconds breathing while the irritation moves through your system. When you reconnect, you can respond from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. Here's another example. You see a social media post that triggers comparison or jealousy. Your first instinct might be to scroll through more posts or search for information that makes you feel better or worse. Instead, you activate airplane mode immediately. You spend 90 seconds noticing the physical sensations. Notice how your chest tightens and resets once cortisol recedes in roughly 2 minutes if left undisturbed. You breathe and watch these sensations change and fade as the chemicals process through your system. The technique works because it addresses the root cause of modern emotional dysregulation. You're not trying to suppress or change your emotions. You're simply creating the conditions where your natural emotional processing system can function properly. Your body knows how to handle emotions. It just needs 90 seconds of uninterrupted time to do its job. People who master this updated approach report remarkable improvements in their emotional stability in high-stress digital environments. They stop feeling like victims of their emotional reactions because they understand the mechanics behind them. They realize that most of their emotional suffering came from digital interruptions, preventing natural emotional resolution. This airplane mode reset becomes the foundation for every other emotional regulation technique you'll learn. When you can successfully create 90 seconds of digital silence, you've proven to yourself that you have more control over your emotional environment than you realized. But even with this foundational skill, there's a deeper challenge that most people don't recognize. The content you consume during your connected time is actively working against your emotional stability in ways that traditional techniques weren't designed to handle. Cognitive framing for the algorithm age. Social media algorithms have fundamentally rewired how your brain processes disappointment and comparison. These systems don't just show you content randomly. They analyze your behavior patterns, emotional responses, and engagement habits to serve you exactly the type of content that will keep you scrolling. When you see that perfect vacation photo or career announcement, it's not coincidence. The algorithm calculated that this specific content would trigger an emotional response in you. The research reveals something disturbing about this process. Curated social feeds create what scientists call artificial expectation inflation. your brain starts calibrating normal life against highlight reels that were specifically designed to make you feel inadequate. When you see friend after friend posting about promotions, relationships, or achievements, your brain doesn't recognize that you're seeing a filtered sample. It processes this information as if it represents typical reality. This creates chronic dissatisfaction that traditional therapy techniques struggle to address. Your brain is comparing your actual life against artificially curated perfection. Dartmouth's fMRI studies reveal that people fixate on negative comparison posts for longer than they realize, showing a distorted focus on curated content that skews perception. Your disappointment feels valid because the comparison triggers are constant and convincing. Traditional cognitive reframing techniques fall apart when they compete against algorithmic manipulation. These platforms employ teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists whose job is to trigger emotional responses. When you try to reframe a negative thought, you're fighting against billion-dollar companies that have designed their systems to undermine rational thinking. Your individual effort to think differently gets overwhelmed by engineered emotional manipulation. The algorithms create echo chambers that reinforce whatever emotional state they detect. If you're feeling insecure about your career, you'll see more content about other people's professional success. If you're worried about your relationship, you'll see more posts about perfect couples. The system amplifies whatever trigger it identifies, because engagement driven by negative emotions is still profitable engagement. This requires a completely different approach to cognitive reframing. Reality-based reframing acknowledges that you're not just dealing with your own thoughts and perceptions. You're dealing with artificial intelligence systems designed to manipulate your emotional responses for profit. The traditional approach of challenging negative thoughts assumes your thoughts are based on reality. In the algorithm age, many of your thoughts are based on artificially curated unreality. The three-step reality-based reframing process starts with identifying the algorithmic trigger. When you feel inadequate, disappointed, or envious after scrolling through social media, ask yourself what specific content triggered that response. Was it the LinkedIn post about someone's promotion? The Instagram story showing someone's perfect relationship? The Facebook update about a friend's new house? Name the specific trigger, because awareness interrupts the automatic emotional cascade. Step 2 involves questioning the curated reality. Remember that what you're seeing represents a tiny fraction of that person's actual experience. That promotion post doesn't show you the rejections, the late nights, the stress, or the sacrifices that led to that moment. The relationship photos don't capture the arguments, the doubts, or the mundane moments that make up most partnerships. The vacation pictures don't include the planning stress, the travel delays, or the credit card bill. The algorithm shows you highlights because highlights generate engagement. Nobody posts about their boring Tuesday or their relationship disagreements or their career setbacks. You're comparing your complete life experience, including all the mundane and difficult parts, against other people's greatest hits compilation. Harvard's research on social comparison confirms this distortion, while Cornell's spotlight effect studies show we overestimate how much attention others pay to our lives, creating unnecessary self-consciousness. Step 3. Reframes based on your actual personal experience rather than algorithmic distortion. Instead of measuring your career progress against LinkedIn's highlight reel, evaluate it against your own starting point. Instead of comparing your relationship to Instagram perfection, assess it based on your actual needs and experiences. This isn't positive thinking or denial. It's accurate thinking that accounts for the artificial nature of social media comparison. Let's apply this to career disappointment. You didn't get the promotion you wanted, and your LinkedIn feed shows 3 people announcing new positions. The algorithmic trigger is those promotion posts. Questioning the curated reality means recognizing that LinkedIn's algorithm specifically shows you career content when you're already thinking about career issues. You're not seeing a representative sample of career outcomes. You're seeing content selected to engage you emotionally. Reframing based on actual experience means evaluating your career progress against your own trajectory, not against curated highlights. What skills have you developed? What relationships have you built? What challenges have you overcome? Your career disappointment is real, but it doesn't need to be magnified by artificial comparison to people whose complete stories you don't know. Relationship concerns work similarly. You see couples posting perfect moments and start questioning your own partnership. The algorithmic trigger is those relationship posts. Questioning the curated reality means remembering that these platforms profit from making you feel inadequate. The algorithm shows you idealized relationships when it detects relationship-related engagement from you. Yale Medicine's guidance emphasizes establishing positive social media boundaries, particularly regarding parental monitoring and healthy digital habits that prevent comparison-based thinking patterns. This approach differs from traditional positive thinking because it acknowledges the artificial manipulation you're facing. You're not just trying to think more positively. You're recognizing that many of your negative thoughts are artificially generated by systems designed to undermine your contentment. This awareness changes everything because it shifts the problem from your inadequacy to environmental manipulation. The challenge is that algorithms are specifically designed to prevent this kind of rational analysis. They create urgency, trigger fear of missing out, and flood you with emotional content before you can think critically. The platforms profit when you react emotionally rather than think rationally. Your ability to step back and analyze the manipulation threatens their business model. Understanding algorithmic manipulation becomes essential for emotional freedom. When you recognize that many of your comparison-based thoughts are artificially generated, you can use algorithm-triggered emotions as practice opportunities. Instead of falling into comparison traps, you can use them as cues to practice reality-based reframing. The manipulation becomes the trigger for building emotional resilience rather than emotional reactivity. But even when you master reframing algorithmic distortion, there's another layer of digital manipulation that's breaking digital rumination loops. This mental manipulation operates through what researchers call manufactured rumination. Brain imaging studies from 2020-25 reveal something fascinating about how your mind processes worry in the digital age. When researchers scanned brains during traditional worry versus digital rumination, they discovered completely different neural patterns. Your brain lights up differently when you're scrolling through endless feeds compared to when you're thinking through actual problems. This isn't just a minor difference in brain activity. It's evidence that digital rumination creates entirely new forms of mental loops that your evolved worry interruption systems can't handle. Traditional worry typically involves specific concerns with potential solutions. Your brain activates problem-solving networks and eventually reaches resolution or exhaustion. Digital rumination works differently. The constant stream of new information prevents your brain from reaching any natural stopping point. You're not processing finite information that leads to conclusions. You're processing infinite feeds designed to never end. Social media platforms engineer their feeds to keep you engaged by triggering emotional responses. The algorithms don't care whether those emotions help you solve problems. They only care about keeping your attention. When you see concerning news, relationship drama, or career anxiety triggers in your feed, you're not encountering natural problems that require solutions. You're consuming artificially amplified content designed to make you keep scrolling. This manufactured rumination feels productive because it mimics research and information gathering. Your brain registers the activity as problem-solving behavior. But you're not actually solving anything. You're consuming engineered emotional content that creates the illusion of productivity while deepening anxiety. The more you scroll, the more problems you discover that you never knew existed and can't actually address. Digital thought spirals trap you in cycles where online research deepens anxiety instead of resolving it. You start by looking up information about a health concern, career question, or relationship issue. The internet provides endless conflicting information, worst-case scenarios, and edge cases that amplify your original worry. What began as a simple question becomes a deep dive into increasingly alarming possibilities that leave you more anxious than when you started. Your brain can't distinguish between useful information gathering and digital rumination because both activities involve processing information. The key difference is that productive research leads to actionable conclusions, while digital rumination leads to more questions and deeper anxiety. When you're truly researching solutions, you can identify specific next steps. When you're caught in digital rumination, you find yourself reading the same information repeatedly without gaining clarity. Breaking these modern rumination patterns requires physical, non-digital intervention. Your brain needs to exit the digital environment entirely to interrupt the loop. The 5-3-1 technique provides a structured approach specifically designed for digital rumination. 5 offline sensory observations, 3 minutes of analog activity, and 1 real-world action. Here's how it works in practice. When you catch yourself in a digital rumination loop, immediately step away from all screens. Make 5 specific sensory observations about your physical environment. Notice the texture of the wall when you touch it. Listen to sounds outside your window. Smell the air in the room. Feel the temperature on your skin. Observe the colors and shapes around you. These observations ground your awareness in physical reality instead of digital abstraction. The 3 minutes of analog activity comes next. Pick something that requires physical manipulation without digital input. Write with a pen on paper. Organize objects on your desk. Do stretches or basic exercises. Wash dishes by hand. The key is engaging your body in purposeful movement that has nothing to do with information processing. This breaks the neural pattern that keeps you trapped in digital loops. The final step involves taking 1 real-world action related to your original concern, if action is actually needed. If you were ruminating about a work problem, send 1 specific email or make 1 phone call. If you were worrying about your health, schedule 1 appointment or ask 1 person for advice. The action must be concrete and limited. You're not trying to solve everything. You're proving to your brain that productive action is possible and more effective than endless information consumption. Physical activities work because they activate different neural networks than digital information processing. When you're scrolling through feeds, you're primarily using visual processing and pattern recognition systems. Physical activities engage sensory motor networks, spatial reasoning, and embodied cognition. This neurological shift interrupts the rumination pattern by literally changing which parts of your brain are active. Many people struggle to recognize digital rumination because it disguises itself as staying informed or being productive. You tell yourself you're researching important topics or keeping up with current events. The platforms reinforce this illusion by presenting information in news-like formats with serious headlines and authoritative sources. Your brain interprets this as important information gathering rather than engineered content consumption. The difference between productive information gathering and digital rumination becomes clear when you examine the outcomes. Productive research leads to decisions, actions, or peace of mind. Digital rumination leads to more questions, increased anxiety, and hours of lost time without meaningful progress. If you've spent significant time consuming information without reaching actionable conclusions, you're probably ruminating rather than researching. These digital rumination patterns become especially problematic when your work and personal environments merge into the same physical space. The boundaries that once helped separate different types of thinking and emotional processing disappear completely. The Remote Work Emotional Toolkit. Working from home forces your brain to process professional emotions in spaces designed for personal comfort, creating unprecedented challenges for emotional regulation. Remote work has created entirely new categories of emotional challenges that traditional workplace coping strategies simply can't handle. Your brain developed emotional regulation systems over thousands of years, based on physical environments with clear boundaries, social hierarchies you could read through body language, and natural transitions between work and rest spaces. Working from home breaks all these evolutionary assumptions about how emotions should be processed and regulated. The numbers from 2025 research tell a striking story. 67% of remote workers report feeling emotionally stuck due to lack of environmental variety and social cues. Your emotional processing system relies heavily on environmental changes and social feedback to calibrate appropriate responses. When you're sitting in the same chair, looking at the same wall, interacting with the same screen for 8 hours straight, your brain loses crucial context clues that help regulate emotional intensity and duration. Video call fatigue creates stress patterns that accumulate differently than in-person work interactions. During face-to-face conversations, your brain processes hundreds of micro-expressions, posture shifts, and environmental cues that help you gauge social dynamics and emotional undertones. Video calls eliminate most of these signals while demanding the same level of social processing. Your brain works overtime trying to read incomplete information, creating a specific type of cognitive exhaustion that builds throughout the day. Digital collaboration adds another layer of emotional complexity. Email tone gets misinterpreted without vocal cues. Slack messages feel urgent even when they're routine. Project delays feel more personal when you're isolated from the collaborative energy that helps normalize workplace challenges. These digital interactions create emotional responses that your brain struggles to process appropriately because it lacks the social context that would typically help calibrate your reactions. The solution involves what researchers call micro-environment shifting. This technique recognizes that your physical environment directly influences your emotional state through sensory input and spatial associations. When you can't change your overall work location, you need to create deliberate environmental variations that signal different emotional states to your brain. Your emotional regulation toolkit for remote work starts with designated emotional reset set spaces. This doesn't require a separate room or expensive equipment. You need one specific location in your home that your brain associates with emotional processing rather than work productivity. This might be a particular chair, a corner by a window, or even a spot on your floor with a specific cushion. The key is consistency. Every time you need to process difficult emotions, you move to this exact location. The physical movement between your workspace and your emotional reset space signals to your brain that you're shifting from productivity mode to processing mode. This spatial transition replaces the emotional processing cues you would normally get from walking to a colleague's office, stepping outside, or moving to a break room. Your brain needs these physical transitions to recognize when it's appropriate to process emotions versus when it needs to maintain focus. Lighting changes provide another powerful tool for mood regulation in home environments. Your circadian rhythms and emotional processing systems respond directly to light quality and intensity. During stressful work periods, bright white light helps maintain focus and energy. When you need to process emotions or wind down, warmer, dimmer lighting signals to your brain that it's safe to relax and feel. Many remote workers find that adjustable desk lamps or smart bulbs allow them to match their lighting to their emotional needs throughout the day. Physical movement protocols between digital interactions help prevent the emotional stacking that builds during back-to-back video calls. Your body needs to discharge the physiological activation that comes from sustained digital focus and social performance. Simple movements like shoulder rolls, neck stretches, or walking to another room for 30 seconds can interrupt the accumulation of stress hormones that builds during extended screen time. Creating emotional boundaries when home and workspaces overlap requires sensory anchors and ritual transitions. Your brain needs clear signals about when work emotions are appropriate versus when personal emotions take priority. This might involve changing clothes between work and personal time, playing specific music that signals the end of the workday, or using particular scents associated with relaxation. These sensory cues help your brain compartmentalize emotional responses appropriately. Processing work emotions without traditional office social support systems presents unique challenges. In physical offices, you might process frustrating meetings through brief conversations with colleagues, read social cues about whether your reactions are normal, or simply observe how others handle similar situations. Remote work eliminates these informal emotional processing opportunities, leaving you to manage work emotions in isolation. The absence of casual workplace interactions means you lose access to emotional reality checking that happens naturally in office environments. When you're frustrated with a project or confused by feedback, You can't gauge whether your emotional response is proportionate by observing colleagues' reactions. This isolation can amplify work emotions because you lack social feedback to help calibrate appropriate responses. Remote workers who develop these specialized emotional tools report dramatic improvements in their work experience. Research shows 52% higher job satisfaction and 41% better work-life integration among people who master these techniques. The improvement comes from regaining control over emotional processing in environments that weren't designed for sustained work and emotional regulation. But mastering your private emotional space is only half the challenge. The moment you share anything online, you enter a completely different emotional landscape where traditional rules about social judgment no longer apply. Social media spotlight syndrome. Online interactions create permanent records that amplify every social misstep. 78% of regular social media users now experience what researchers identified as social media spotlight syndrome in 2025. This phenomenon feels similar to the traditional spotlight effect, where you imagine everyone is watching and judging your every move. The critical difference is that social media actually creates permanent, searchable records of your mistakes and awkward moments. Your fear of judgment isn't purely psychological anymore. There's a digital paper trail of every embarrassing post, every poorly timed comment, and every moment you wish you could take back. Screenshot culture has fundamentally changed the stakes of social interaction. When you say something awkward at a party, the moment passes and people forget. When you post something awkward online, someone can capture it, share it, and preserve it forever. Your brain recognizes this reality and responds with heightened vigilance about your online behavior. The anxiety you feel about posting that photo or sharing that opinion reflects a rational assessment of digital permanence, not just irrational fear. Viral shaming adds another layer of legitimate concern to online interactions. Stories spread quickly about people whose single posts destroyed their careers, relationships, or reputations. Your brain processes these examples as evidence that online judgment carries real consequences. The traditional spotlight effect assumed that most perceived judgment was imaginary. Social media spotlight syndrome acknowledges that digital judgment can have lasting impact on your actual life. The paradox runs deeper than most people realize. While more people can potentially see your content than ever before, most of them are too distracted by their own online presence to deeply analyze yours. Everyone is simultaneously performing and judging, creating a strange dynamic where maximum visibility coincides with minimal sustained attention. People scroll past your posts quickly because they're focused on how their own content is being received. This creates an interesting psychological trap. You experience the stress of potential judgment from a massive audience, but most of that audience isn't actually paying close attention to you. They're worried about their own online image, checking their own notifications, and managing their own digital anxiety. Your fear of being watched is often more intense than the actual watching happening. Understanding this dynamic requires developing what researchers call a selective visibility strategy. This approach involves consciously choosing what deserves public emotional energy versus private processing. Not every online interaction warrants the same level of emotional investment. A thoughtless comment from someone you barely know doesn't deserve the same mental space as feedback from someone whose opinion actually matters to your life. The strategy starts with distinguishing between actual social consequences and imagined judgment in digital spaces. Actual consequences involve people who have real influence over your career, relationships, or opportunities. Your boss seeing unprofessional content represents actual risk. Random strangers criticizing your vacation photos represents imagined judgment that has no meaningful impact on your life. Most social media anxiety comes from treating all online judgment as equally threatening. Your brain responds to criticism from strangers with the same stress response it uses for criticism from important people in your life. This wastes enormous emotional energy on interactions that have no bearing on your actual well-being or success. Managing professional reputation when personal and work lives intersect online presents unique challenges. Your LinkedIn connections can see your Facebook posts. Your colleagues might follow your Instagram. Your clients could discover your Twitter account. This overlap means you can't completely separate your personal and professional online identities the way previous generations separated their work and home lives. The solution involves creating intentional boundaries rather than perfect separation. You can't control who sees what, but you can control what you share and how you respond to reactions. This means developing clear personal guidelines about what content you're comfortable having associated with your professional reputation. The guidelines should reflect your actual values and comfort level, rather than attempting to please everyone. Recovery from social media mistakes requires specific techniques that prevent shame spirals. When you post something you regret, your brain often responds with intense self-criticism that amplifies the original problem. You replay the mistake repeatedly, imagine worst-case scenarios, and treat the incident as evidence of fundamental character flaws. This response is usually more damaging than the original mistake. Effective recovery involves acknowledging the mistake without catastrophizing it. Most online mistakes are forgotten quickly because everyone else is focused on their own content and concerns. The people who matter to you will usually judge you based on your overall character rather than isolated incidents. The strangers who might judge you harshly don't have access to your full story, and their opinions don't affect your actual life. The key insight is that digital spotlight dynamics operate differently than face-to-face social judgment. Online interactions lack the contextual cues that help people interpret your intentions and character. A joke that would be obviously humorous in person might seem offensive in text. A comment that would feel casual in conversation might appear confrontational online. Understanding these differences helps you adjust your communication style for digital environments. People who master this distinction between actual and imagined online judgment report significantly less social anxiety and better boundary-setting skills online. They stop wasting emotional energy on meaningless interactions and focus their attention on relationships and opportunities that actually matter. They post more authentically because they're not trying to manage everyone's potential reactions. This improvement comes from recognizing that you can't control how others interpret your online presence, but you can control how much energy you invest in managing those perceptions. The people whose opinions truly matter will judge you based on direct experience rather than social media posts. The people whose opinions don't matter aren't worth the emotional energy required to manage their reactions. Understanding digital spotlight dynamics becomes crucial for emotional freedom because social media will only become more integrated into daily life. Your ability to navigate online social dynamics without constant anxiety determines whether technology enhances or undermines your emotional well-being. The platforms profit from keeping you anxious about social judgment because anxious users check their apps more frequently and engage more intensively with content. But what if technology could work in your favor instead of against your emotional stability? Recent developments in artificial intelligence are revealing unexpected possibilities for emotional regulation that most people haven't considered. AI-assisted self-talk revolution. Your smartphone can now analyze your voice patterns and identify emotional triggers before you consciously recognize them yourself. Researchers made a surprising discovery in 2025 about artificial intelligence and emotional regulation. AI tools can actually enhance traditional third-person self-talk techniques when used correctly. This isn't about replacing human emotional intelligence with technology. It's about using AI to amplify your natural ability to observe and adjust your own thought patterns. The key finding is that technology can help you see your emotional responses more clearly, not think for you. Voice-to-text technology provides a powerful way to externalize your internal dialogue and gain objective perspective on your thought patterns. When you speak your thoughts out loud and see them converted to text, something interesting happens. Your brain processes written words differently than spoken thoughts. The same negative self-talk that feels overwhelming in your head becomes more manageable when you see it written on a screen. You can examine your thoughts like data rather than experiencing them as emotional attacks. This externalization process works because it creates distance between you and your thoughts. Instead of being caught inside a spiral of negative thinking, you can observe your thought patterns from outside. You might notice that you use the same catastrophic phrases repeatedly. You might see that your self-criticism follows predictable patterns. This awareness gives you power to interrupt those patterns instead of being controlled by them. The concern about AI dependency is valid and needs addressing. These tools work best when they accelerate emotional self-awareness rather than replace your own thinking. The goal is developing better emotional regulation skills, not becoming dependent on technology for emotional stability. AI should function like training wheels on a bicycle. It provides support while you develop balance, but eventually you ride independently. Digital self-coaching represents this balanced approach, where technology amplifies rather than replaces human emotional intelligence. AI can process your journal entries and identify emotional patterns that you might miss. It can analyze your voice memos for self-talk awareness, detecting when your tone becomes self-critical or when you use language that indicates emotional distress. The technology provides insights, but you make the decisions about how to respond to those insights. Specific methods for AI-enhanced emotional regulation are becoming more sophisticated. AI can scan your journal entries and highlight recurring themes in your emotional responses. If you consistently write about feeling overwhelmed at work, the system can identify this pattern and suggest specific interventions. Voice memo analysis works similarly. AI can detect changes in your speech patterns that indicate stress, frustration, or sadness, often before you consciously recognize these emotions yourself. Personalized reframing suggestions represent another promising application. Based on your writing patterns and emotional triggers, AI can suggest alternative perspectives that match your communication style and values. Instead of generic positive affirmations, you receive reframing suggestions that sound like something you would actually think. This personalization makes the suggestions more believable and effective. Maintaining human agency while leveraging AI insights requires careful boundaries. You need to remain the decision maker about your emotional responses and coping strategies. AI provides information and suggestions, but you choose which insights to accept and which to ignore. The technology should enhance your self-awareness without replacing your judgment. Think of AI as a very sophisticated mirror that helps you see patterns you might otherwise miss. Real-time emotional situations provide the most compelling applications of AI-enhanced self-talk. Imagine you're in a tense meeting and feeling defensive. You could quickly record a voice memo describing your emotional state. AI analysis might identify that you're using catastrophic language about the meeting's outcome. This awareness helps you recognize your emotional escalation and apply regulation techniques before the situation worsens. Another example involves relationship conflicts. After an argument with your partner, you might feel confused about your emotional reactions. AI could analyze your voice recording and identify specific emotional patterns, like when your frustration shifted to hurt feelings or when your language became more defensive. This analysis helps you understand the emotional progression so you can address the underlying issues more effectively. Work stress provides another practical application. You could end each workday by speaking your thoughts into a voice memo app. AI analysis might reveal patterns in your stress responses, identifying specific triggers that consistently affect your emotional state. Maybe you always feel overwhelmed after client calls on Fridays, or you become irritable when you receive emails late in the day. Recognizing these patterns allows you to prepare differently for high-stress situations. The research findings are compelling. People combining traditional emotional regulation techniques with AI assistance show faster improvement in emotional regulation skills compared to those using traditional methods alone. This acceleration comes from the enhanced self-awareness that AI provides. When you can clearly see your emotional patterns, you can interrupt them more quickly and effectively. The improvement isn't just about speed. AI assistance also helps people develop more personalized emotional regulation strategies. Instead of applying generic techniques, you learn which specific approaches work best for your unique emotional patterns and triggers. This customization makes your emotional regulation toolkit more effective and sustainable. The key insight is that AI works best as a sophisticated feedback system rather than a replacement for human emotional intelligence. Technology can help you see your patterns more clearly, but you still need to develop the skills to respond to those patterns effectively. The combination of technological insight and human wisdom creates more powerful emotional regulation capabilities than either approach alone. But even the most sophisticated emotional regulation tools face unprecedented challenges when the world itself becomes unpredictable. Traditional approaches to managing emotions and pursuing goals assume a relative mental contrasting in an uncertain world. Global events have shattered traditional goal-setting approaches for millions of people. Economic volatility, supply chain disruptions, remote work transformations, and social upheaval have made 5-year plans feel like fantasy exercises. The old model of setting clear goals and working steadily toward them assumes a stable environment where effort reliably produces predictable outcomes. That assumption no longer holds for most people navigating modern reality. The increased uncertainty requires completely updated mental contrasting techniques that account for rapidly changing external conditions. Traditional mental contrasting involves imagining your desired outcome, then identifying obstacles, and finally creating action plans to overcome those barriers. This works when obstacles are primarily personal and environmental factors remain relatively stable. When entire industries disappear overnight or global events reshape employment markets, personal obstacles become secondary to systemic forces beyond individual control. Pure positive visualization feels tone-deaf when you're facing economic instability, climate concerns, and social upheaval. Telling yourself to visualize career success while watching mass layoffs feels disconnected from reality. Imagining relationship stability while social structures shift around you ignores legitimate concerns about external pressures on partnerships. The traditional approach of focusing solely on personal agency creates cognitive dissonance when external factors clearly influence outcomes more than individual effort. Motivational content that ignores systemic challenges sounds increasingly hollow to people experiencing real constraints. When housing costs consume 60% of income, visualizing home ownership without acknowledging economic realities becomes an exercise in self-deception, rather than goal setting. When climate change affects everything from food prices to career stability, pretending individual visualization alone determines outcomes feels naive rather than empowering. Adaptive mental contrasting builds flexibility and multiple scenario planning into goal pursuit. This updated approach acknowledges that outcomes depend on both personal effort and external conditions that change unpredictably. Instead of creating single pathways toward fixed goals, you develop multiple strategies that work under different circumstances. This isn't pessimistic planning. It's realistic preparation that maintains motivation while accounting for uncertainty. The updated process starts with envisioning desired outcomes just like traditional approaches. You still need clear pictures of what you want to achieve. The difference comes in how you handle obstacles and pathways. Instead of identifying only personal barriers, you examine both personal and systemic obstacles that could affect your progress. This means considering how economic trends, technological changes, social shifts, and environmental factors might influence your goal achievement. Creating multiple pathway strategies becomes essential when single approaches prove insufficient for complex challenges. If your career goal depends on a specific industry, you develop parallel skills that transfer to related fields. If your relationship goals assume certain social conditions, you build flexibility that adapts to changing cultural norms. If your personal development plans require specific resources, you identify alternative approaches that work under different circumstances. Building pivot points into plans prevents you from becoming stuck when conditions change unexpectedly. These aren't backup plans that you use when your main plan fails. They're decision points built into your primary strategy, where you evaluate conditions and adjust direction based on new information. Pivot points help you stay responsive to changing circumstances without abandoning your core objectives. This approach maintains motivation while acknowledging external factors beyond individual control. You remain committed to your goals, while accepting that the path toward achieving them might look different than originally planned. This balance prevents the discouragement that comes from unrealistic expectations while maintaining the drive necessary for meaningful progress. Balancing personal agency with realistic assessment of global constraints requires sophisticated thinking that traditional goal-setting approaches don't address. You need to maintain belief in your ability to influence outcomes while acknowledging that some factors remain beyond your control. This isn't about accepting defeat or reducing ambition. It's about directing energy toward areas where you can make meaningful impact while preparing for variables you can't control. Career goals provide clear examples of applying adaptive mental contrasting in uncertain environments. Instead of planning for one specific job title or company, you develop skills that remain valuable across multiple scenarios. You might pursue expertise in remote collaboration while also building local networking relationships. You could develop technical skills while strengthening human connection abilities that artificial intelligence can't replace. This approach prepares you for various possible futures rather than betting everything on one specific outcome. Relationship aspirations require similar adaptive thinking when social conditions continue shifting. Instead of planning relationships based on traditional models that might not fit current realities, you develop communication skills and emotional intelligence that strengthen connections regardless of external circumstances. You might build financial independence while also cultivating interdependence skills. You could develop conflict resolution abilities while learning to navigate changing social expectations about partnership roles. Uncertainty can actually enhance rather than hinder goal achievement when approached strategically. Unstable conditions create opportunities for people who remain flexible and responsive. Industries in flux offer openings for innovative approaches. Social changes create needs for new solutions. Environmental challenges require creative problem-solving that creates value. People who adapt quickly to changing conditions often achieve goals that seemed impossible under previous circumstances. The strategic approach to uncertainty involves viewing instability as information rather than obstacle. Changes in your environment provide data about emerging opportunities and threats. Instead of fighting against uncertainty, you use it to refine your strategies and discover paths that weren't visible under stable conditions. This perspective transforms uncertainty from enemy into ally in goal achievement. But even the most sophisticated adaptive planning faces a deeper challenge. The sheer volume of information and choices available today creates a different kind of overwhelm that requires entirely new forms of mental resilience. Building antifragility against digital overwhelm. Information overload in 2025 demands a completely new approach to mental resilience. Traditional stress management techniques assume that stress comes in waves, with recovery periods between challenges. Digital stress never stops. Your brain processes notifications, social media updates, news alerts, and work messages in an endless stream that your nervous system wasn't designed to handle. You need more than coping strategies. You need to become anti-fragile against digital chaos. Stress inoculation worked when challenges were finite. You'd face a difficult situation, adapt to it, and then rest before the next challenge appeared. Digital overwhelm operates differently. The challenges multiply faster than you can process them. Email creates more email. Social media feeds generate infinite content. News cycles accelerate instead of resolving. Choice paralysis increases as options expand exponentially. Your brain can't build immunity against infinite stimulation using techniques designed for finite stressors. Constant connectivity has created psychological challenges that human evolution never prepared you to handle. UC Davis data shows people spend 145 minutes daily on social media, releasing cortisol and dopamine cycles that mirror fight-flight responses. Your ancestors dealt with immediate physical threats that had clear beginnings and endings. Modern digital threats are abstract, ongoing, and multiply exponentially. Your brain responds to information overload with the same stress chemicals it uses for physical danger, but digital threats never resolve completely. This creates chronic activation of stress systems that were meant to operate in short bursts. Digital antifragility represents the ability to not just survive, but actually thrive amid information chaos and technological disruption. Instead of being weakened by digital challenges, you become stronger through exposure to them. This isn't about building tolerance or developing coping mechanisms. It's about transforming digital stressors into sources of growth and capability. Antifragile systems improve under stress rather than just enduring it. The difference between surviving and thriving becomes crucial when dealing with infinite information streams. Survival strategies focus on protection and damage control. You limit exposure, create boundaries, and try to minimize harm. Thriving strategies focus on growth and capability building. You engage with challenges strategically to build strength, rather than avoiding them to prevent weakness. Controlled information fasting builds cognitive immune systems that strengthen from strategic exposure to digital challenges. This isn't about eliminating information entirely. It's about consuming information deliberately rather than reactively. You choose specific times for news consumption instead of checking constantly throughout the day. You engage with social media intentionally rather than scrolling mindlessly. This controlled exposure teaches your brain to process information without becoming overwhelmed by it. The fasting periods allow your nervous system to reset between information consumption sessions. Your brain needs time to process and integrate information before receiving new inputs. When you consume information continuously, your processing systems become backlogged and overwhelmed. Strategic breaks allow your cognitive systems to catch up and prepare for the next information session. Deliberate analog skill development creates cognitive diversity that makes you less dependent on digital systems for basic functions. When you can navigate using paper maps, communicate through handwritten letters, and solve problems without internet research, you maintain cognitive flexibility that purely digital lifestyles eliminate. These analog skills provide backup systems when digital tools fail or overwhelm you. Analog activities also engage different neural networks than digital tasks. Reading physical books uses different brain pathways than reading screens. Writing by hand activates different cognitive processes than typing. Playing board games exercises problem-solving skills differently than video games. This cognitive diversity makes your brain more adaptable and resilient when facing various types of challenges. Strategic technology use involves engaging with digital tools intentionally rather than avoiding them completely. Digital minimalism tries to reduce technology use to essential functions only. Digital antifragility embraces technology use while maintaining conscious control over how and when you engage. William Smith's echo chamber research reveals that algorithms select stimuli that bracket your fear, preventing emotional resolution, as discussed in Black and John's limbic neocortical loop studies. Understanding this manipulation allows you to use social media to build meaningful connections rather than passive consumption. The strategic approach means treating technology as a tool that serves your goals rather than an entertainment system that consumes your attention. You maintain clear purposes for each digital interaction. When you check email, you're completing specific work tasks. When you browse social media, you're connecting with particular people or communities. When you read news, you're gathering information relevant to your decisions or responsibilities. Building cognitive immune systems requires gradual exposure to digital challenges under controlled conditions. Start with small doses of information consumption and gradually increase as your processing capacity improves. Practice making decisions quickly when faced with multiple options. Expose yourself to conflicting information sources and practice maintaining emotional equilibrium while processing disagreement. Digital minimalism focuses on passive protection through avoidance and reduction. Digital antifragility creates active strength through strategic engagement and skill building. You develop capabilities that allow you to engage with digital environments without being overwhelmed by them. Instead of avoiding social media, you learn to use it effectively. Instead of limiting news consumption completely, you develop skills for processing current events without anxiety. Work technology becomes therapeutic when combined with emotion regulation mindfulness exercises, as UNSW pain and emotion therapy research demonstrates. Digital tools can be repurposed to support emotional well-being rather than undermine it. You batch similar tasks together rather than switching constantly between different types of work. You set specific times for email and messaging rather than responding immediately to every notification. The broader applications of digital antifragility extend far beyond technology management into general resilience and capability building. People who develop these skills report feeling more capable and confident across all life areas because they've learned to thrive under challenging conditions rather than just survive them. But developing this strength requires more than individual resilience techniques when the challenges themselves involve forces beyond personal control. The new Stockdale Paradox for modern achievers. The traditional Stockdale Paradox worked perfectly when challenges had clear boundaries and predictable timelines. You maintained unwavering faith that you would prevail while confronting the brutal facts of your current reality. This approach helped prisoners of war survive captivity because their situation, however difficult, was finite. They could maintain hope for eventual freedom while dealing honestly with present suffering. The modern world has shattered this framework completely. Climate anxiety creates a different psychological challenge than previous generations faced. You're not dealing with temporary hardship that will eventually end. You're facing permanent changes to the planet that will affect every aspect of human civilization for centuries. Maintaining hope while confronting brutal facts becomes infinitely more complex when those facts include rising sea levels, extreme weather patterns, and ecosystem collapse that your personal efforts can't reverse. Economic uncertainty operates on scales that dwarf individual control. You can work harder, develop new skills, and make smart financial decisions, but global supply chains, monetary policy, and technological disruption reshape entire industries overnight. The brutal facts include forces so large that personal agency feels meaningless by comparison. Traditional approaches to hope and realism break down when the systems affecting your life operate beyond human comprehension or control. Social fragmentation adds another layer of complexity to modern goal pursuit. Previous generations could rely on stable institutions, predictable social norms, and shared cultural narratives to guide their planning. You're navigating fractured information environments, polarized communities, and rapidly changing social expectations. The brutal facts include the reality that society itself is becoming less reliable as a foundation for individual planning. The unique challenge involves balancing personal agency with acknowledgement of massive forces that impact your outcomes, regardless of effort or planning. You need to maintain motivation for personal growth, while accepting that external factors increasingly determine life outcomes. This creates psychological tension that traditional approaches can't resolve. Pure optimism ignores legitimate constraints. Pure pessimism eliminates motivation for improvement. The Adapt Stockdale approach separates controllable from uncontrollable factors while maintaining active engagement with both categories. Instead of focusing solely on areas within your control, you develop strategies that account for external forces while maximizing your influence within realistic constraints. This doesn't mean accepting defeat or reducing ambition. It means directing energy more strategically toward areas where effort produces meaningful results. Controllable factors include your skills, relationships, health habits, financial decisions, and response patterns to external events. You maintain unwavering commitment to developing these areas because they remain within your direct influence regardless of broader circumstances. Personal growth continues even when external conditions become challenging or unpredictable. Uncontrollable factors include economic trends, political decisions, climate changes, technological disruptions, and social movements that reshape the environment around you. The adaptive approach acknowledges these forces honestly, while developing flexibility to respond when they create new constraints or opportunities. You can't control these factors, but you can prepare for various scenarios they might create. Maintaining unwavering commitment to personal growth while realistically assessing external constraints requires sophisticated thinking that goes beyond traditional positive psychology. You need mature hope that accounts for systemic challenges, rather than pretending individual effort alone determines outcomes. This isn't toxic positivity that ignores structural realities. It's strategic optimism that works within realistic parameters. The difference between toxic positivity and mature hope becomes crucial when facing systemic challenges. Toxic positivity tells you to think positive thoughts and trust that everything will work out perfectly. Mature hope acknowledges that some problems are too large for individual solutions, while maintaining commitment to contributing positively within realistic constraints. You can work toward environmental sustainability while accepting that climate change will reshape civilization regardless of your personal carbon footprint. Avoiding paralyzing despair about global issues requires focusing on contribution rather than control. When you try to control outcomes beyond your influence, you become overwhelmed by the impossibility of the task. When you focus on making meaningful contributions within your capabilities, you maintain agency and motivation, even when facing enormous challenges. Your career success might depend partly on economic forces beyond your control, but you can still develop valuable skills and build meaningful relationships. Consider how veterans apply this approach when facing ongoing deployment uncertainty. They maintain commitment to personal fitness, skill development, and family relationships while accepting that deployment schedules depend on geopolitical factors beyond their control. Dartmouth research shows that veterans using mindfulness-based approaches demonstrate balanced amygdala PFC engagement, creating sustainable hope that acknowledges uncertainty without becoming paralyzed by it. They focus their energy on areas where effort produces meaningful results, while preparing mentally for various scenarios they might face. This balanced approach actually increases rather than decreases personal power and effectiveness, because it directs energy toward areas where effort produces meaningful results. When you stop wasting energy trying to control uncontrollable factors, you have more resources available for areas within your influence. Strategic focus creates better outcomes than diffused effort across impossible tasks. The psychological benefits extend beyond practical effectiveness into sustainable motivation and stress management. When your expectations align with realistic possibilities, you experience less frustration and disappointment. When your efforts focus on achievable goals, you build confidence through consistent progress rather than constant failure against impossible standards. Admiral Stockdale's Paradox, adapted in 2025, integrates real-time fMRI resilience biomarkers as the modern evidence base, showing how balanced optimism creates measurable changes in brain function. This neurological foundation proves that the updated approach works not just psychologically, but physiologically, creating lasting changes in how your brain processes stress and uncertainty. The same research shows significantly more sustainable motivation for long-term goals among people who separate controllable from uncontrollable factors. This sustainability comes from maintaining engagement with meaningful work while accepting that outcomes depend partly on factors beyond individual influence. You can remain committed to important goals while adapting strategies based on changing circumstances. But understanding these principles intellectually is different from applying them consistently in your daily life. The gap between knowing what works and actually doing it consistently requires your personalized resilience operating system. Building a system that actually works requires understanding your unique emotional patterns rather than following generic templates. Researchers made a startling discovery in 2025 about emotional regulation effectiveness. Generic advice fails because it ignores individual differences in how people process stress, use technology, and navigate relationships. Your emotional regulation system needs to match your specific lifestyle, work environment, and personal triggers. What works for someone who spends 8 hours daily on video calls won't work for someone who travels constantly for work. What helps a parent juggling remote work and childcare won't help a single person living alone in a city apartment. Individual differences in digital usage create vastly different emotional challenges that require customized approaches. Someone who checks social media twice daily faces different regulation needs than someone who scrolls continuously throughout the day. A person whose work requires constant connectivity experiences different stress patterns than someone who can disconnect during personal time. Your brain's response to digital stimulation depends on your usage patterns, personality traits, and environmental factors that generic advice can't address. Work styles create another layer of individual variation that affects emotional regulation needs. Open office environments generate different stress responses than home offices. Creative work that requires deep focus creates different emotional challenges than customer service roles that involve constant interaction. Project-based work with irregular deadlines produces different anxiety patterns than routine daily tasks. Your emotional regulation system must account for these specific professional realities, rather than assuming universal workplace stress. Social needs vary dramatically between individuals and directly impact which emotional regulation techniques prove effective. Introverts process emotions differently than extroverts. People with large social networks face different relationship stresses than those with small, close circles. Cultural backgrounds influence emotional expression patterns and acceptable regulation strategies. Family structures create unique emotional dynamics that require tailored approaches rather than one-size-fits-all solutions. Stress responses operate differently across individuals based on genetics, life experiences, and current circumstances. Some people's nervous systems activate quickly and calm down slowly. Others experience gradual stress buildup that explodes suddenly. Physical health conditions affect stress processing. Sleep patterns influence emotional reactivity. Age and hormonal changes alter how your brain responds to triggers. These biological differences require personalized approaches that work with your specific stress response patterns. Generic emotional regulation advice fails because it treats all brains as identical when neuroscience proves otherwise. Meditation works wonderfully for some people and increases anxiety for others. Physical exercise regulates emotions effectively for many people, but triggers negative body image thoughts for others. Journaling helps process emotions for some individuals, while rumination-prone people find it worsens their mental state. Social connection soothes certain personality types while overstimulating others who need solitude to regulate emotions. Your resilience operating system integrates the techniques you've learned into a personalized framework that matches your unique emotional patterns and lifestyle demands. This approach builds on positive psychology's 10-tool resilience toolkit, which Harvard and UNSW research shows creates lasting improvements when tailored to individual needs. Rather than randomly combining different strategies, you create a systematic approach that addresses your specific triggers, leverages your natural strengths, and compensates for your particular vulnerabilities. The foundation involves identifying your primary emotional triggers and matching them with the most effective regulation strategies for your specific response patterns. If digital overwhelm dominates your challenges, the airplane mode reset and controlled information fasting become central to your system. If work stress drives most regulation needs, remote work emotional toolkit techniques and microenvironment shifting take priority. If social anxiety creates your biggest struggles, the social media spotlight syndrome strategies and reality-based reframing become your go-to approaches. UNSW's EMDR study reveals that PTSD resilience links to prefrontal hippocampal plasticity, showing how third-person self-talk parallels EMDR mechanisms of cognitive distancing. This research demonstrates that personalized approaches create measurable brain changes that generic strategies cannot achieve. When techniques match your specific neural patterns and triggers, they create lasting neurological improvements rather than temporary coping mechanisms. Building your system requires real-world experimentation rather than theoretical planning. Implement one technique at a time for at least a week before adding additional elements. Track what actually works in your daily life versus what sounds good on paper. Some techniques that seem perfect for your situation might feel unnatural or ineffective when you try them. Others that seem unlikely might prove surprisingly helpful for your specific emotional patterns and lifestyle demands. The key to sustainable practice involves anchoring your techniques to existing daily routines. Sinai's meditative network recalibration studies show that consistent practice times create stronger neural pathways than sporadic intensive sessions. Identify one daily routine you already maintain, like morning coffee or evening wind down, to signal reset time. This routine becomes your cue to engage emotional regulation practices without requiring additional willpower or schedule management. Flexibility becomes essential as your life circumstances inevitably change over time. Career transitions, relationship changes, health developments, and aging all affect your emotional regulation needs. Your system should include regular review periods where you assess whether your current techniques still match your current reality. Add new strategies as you encounter different challenges. Retire techniques that no longer serve your changing circumstances. Long-term benefits of personalized approaches far exceed generic strategies or willpower-based approaches that inevitably fail under pressure. Your customized system becomes automatic over time, requiring less conscious effort as techniques integrate into natural daily patterns. Personalized approaches prove more sustainable because they align with your actual lifestyle rather than fighting against your natural tendencies and environmental realities. You now possess the framework to build your own emotional regulation system tailored specifically to your unique circumstances and challenges. This personalized approach will serve you far better than any generic advice because it accounts for your individual emotional patterns, trigger profiles, and life circumstances. The question isn't whether you need these skills, but how quickly you can adapt them to match the reality you're actually living. These techniques represent evolution, not retreat. Emotional regulation in 2025 isn't about returning to simpler times. It's about evolving your human capabilities to match technological reality. Your ancient nervous system needs updated tools to handle modern digital challenges that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Choose one technique from today that resonated most with you. Commit to practicing it for 7 days. Whether it's the airplane mode reset, reality-based reframing, or building your personalized system, consistency matters more than perfection. Mastering these updated emotional regulation skills doesn't just help you survive modern challenges. It positions you to thrive in an increasingly complex world where emotional intelligence becomes your greatest